when we look at the study of variation, it's important to realize that language isn't a single, uniform entity. Instead, it exists in many different shades and varieties, each reflecting the diverse identities of the people who speak it. These variations are shaped by factors like geography, social background, and cultural influences. In this presentation, we'll explore the boundaries between what we typically call languages and dialects. We'll see how these distinctions are often influenced by social and geographical factors, rather than strict linguistic rules. It's also crucial to understand that sociolinguists treat all language varieties as structured systems. Whether a dialect has high social status or not, it follows rules and patterns just like any other form of language. So, as we discuss variation, language, and dialect, keep in mind that these differences are natural and systematic. They tell us a lot about how people identify themselves and their communities through the way they speak. When we talk about different ways of speaking, terms like language and dialect can sometimes be tricky because they carry political and social connotations. That's why many linguists prefer to use the neutral term variety or code instead. A variety, in simple terms, is a set of linguistic forms, sounds, words, grammar, that has a distinctive social distribution. In other words, it appears in specific situations or among certain groups. Now, when we look at the spectrum of varieties, it's actually quite broad. It can include entire languages, regional dialects, social sociolects, or even specialized registers like shop talk. And interestingly, it can also refer to an individual's unique way of speaking, which we call an idiolect. So the key takeaway here is that variety is a flexible, neutral term that helps us discuss all these different forms of language without the political baggage that other terms might carry. This concept ties back to our overall theme of understanding how language functions in social contexts and among different groups. Let's take a closer look at how we traditionally differentiate between a language and a dialect. Historically, the key idea was mutual intelligibility. That is, if speakers can understand each other, we tend to say they're speaking dialects of the same language. But if they can't, then we consider them separate languages. Now, this leads us to the Scandinavian paradox. Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish are mutually intelligible. Speakers can often understand each other quite well. Yet, these are classified as three different languages because they correspond to different nation-states. So, political and national boundaries play a role here too. On the other hand, we have Chinese and German examples that challenge this idea. For instance, many Chinese dialects, like Cantonese and Mandarin, are mutually unintelligible, but they are all grouped under the Chinese language because of shared culture, history, and political identity. Similarly, varieties of German can be quite different from each other, but are still considered part of a single language. This brings us to the core issue. The distinction between language and dialect isn't just about how well people understand each other. It's also shaped by cultural, historical, and political factors. So, the mutual intelligibility criterion, while useful, isn't always enough to define what a language really is. Let's talk about linguistic power. The term language is actually more political than purely scientific. For example, Max Weinreich famously said that a language is a dialect with an army and a navy, which really highlights how political and social factors often determine what we call a language versus a dialect. Next, we have the concepts of autonomy and heteronomy. Autonomy refers to a language variety that stands on its own, with its own standards and rules. Think of it as a fully independent language. Heteronomy, on the other hand, describes a variety that depends on a standard, like how many Dutch dialects look up to Standard Dutch as their norm. Then there's the idea of social reality. In many cases, what we call a language is really a social construct. It's a norm used for communication between speakers of different dialects. So, the label language is often about social and political agreement rather than strict linguistic differences. And that brings us to the main point, the political nature of language. It shows us that language boundaries are not just about linguistics. They're also about power, identity, and social influence. Understanding this helps us see why the definition of a language can be so fluid and influenced by broader social factors.